Alright, how we doing, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Wolf. Welcome to my ultimate build guide for my Bladestorm Berserker. That is still a mouthful to say. This is a character that I started working on back in the start of Legion League, and I never got around to actually finishing it and taking it to endgame, so I decided to do so in Blight League, which probably isn't the best league for it, considering, Blight mechanics is pretty shitty on a melee character. But, live and learn. That's just kind of how it is, I suppose. But all in all, I have had a pretty exceptional time with this character. Like, I haven't had any real issues. Leveling it was an absolute breeze. I leveled, I used totems to start, then I went Cyclone until I got Bladestorm, and then I just ran Bladestorm until endgame, and we were pretty much good. You can level this exact same setup as Cyclone. Hell, you could even switch out Bladestorm to Cyclone if you really wanted to. If you really wanted more, like, AoE clear. If you're, I don't know, watching this in 4.0 or whatever, when you have access to the 8-6 links, maybe you run a Cyclone setup for AoE and optimize your Bladestorm around single target. It probably worked pretty well, if I'm entirely honest. But I have learned quite a bit about playing bleed characters. And I'm going to be entirely honest with you, they're not the best thing in the world. But they are a nice change of pace if you just play physical characters most of the time, like I do. I normally just go raw, pure physical, because Elemental isn't as good with the Elemental Overload nerfs that happened a long time ago, so you can't do, like, Elemental Overload, Res Tech, that sort of stuff. I should play more Elemental, I probably will eventually. But, all in all, with bleed builds, they're enjoyable, they're a little bit off the wall, and they're very gear reliant, which is why making it in solo self-found I don't think was really the best idea. Reason being is they are heavily weapon dependent, as with most physical builds, but you can get away with rather average weapons in certain physical builds because certain skill gems just carry in general, or certain uniques can carry if you get a specific piece. Face breakers, that sort of stuff. The thing about the bleed sort of style is that there's a mod that you can get from a ruptured fossil, I believe it is, or corroded fossil. I think that's the one. That makes it so you deal 60% more damage with bleeds, or your attacks have a chance to deal 60% more damage with bleeds, which is really fucking good. But that fossil is kind of a pain in the ass to farm, and this character wasn't really set up for fossil farming. If I really wanted to take this character into ultimate endgame and do all that sort of stuff, maybe I'd make like a second RF character and just don't run RF and use it to farm fossils or something like that to try and secure some of those, or just buy him in Trade League if I wanted to take that route as well. But that would give a massive boost in DPS. Otherwise, you can just equip pretty much a disfavor if you wanted to. It's a good thing I didn't make this in Legion, because disfavors were like 9 Exalt or some shit like that, because everyone was playing Cyclone at the time. But they're probably back down to 30 Chaos like normal, but still. Alright, so, into the path of building, I'll show you a couple of different things. So, our bleed DPS, obviously, it doesn't look that great, but do keep in mind this scales heavily based on weapons. This is my exact character as it stands right now. I'm clearing tier 11 and tier 12 with zero worry whatsoever. Bossing isn't that great, but I don't have Crimson Dance. If you want to boss effectively, you should put Crimson Dance in and slot it in and out, which consumes Regret Orbs quite rapidly, which is kind of a pain. But yeah, so there's the skill tree I'm going for. Pretty self-explanatory, pretty standard. Take anything that says bleed, take anything that says damage with ailments. We're going with axes because they're the best for bleed builds, at least for the Marauder side anyways. Swords are also a good alternative if you want to take that route. Quick note, anything that says melee range with axes, or just melee range in general, does nothing for Bladestorm. You want percent AoE. That was a weird one to learn personally, but anything that gives weapon range doesn't do shit for Bladestorm. Now, the reason that I say that this bleed DPS is pretty much fine is because most mobs in Path of Exile, at least currently, they may tune up the game and make it harder as time goes on, which they did say they wanted to do. At top end endgame, I believe the highest trash mob HP is around 40k HP-ish. if not a little bit higher, 40 to like 80k HP for most trash mobs up to tier 16, which is, you know, not factoring in rares and rare modifiers, all that sort of shit. 200k bleed DPS kills that pretty easily. And considering that's per second, 200k per second is going to kill 40k just like that, right? That's the thing that most people seem to not really understand about top-end PoE. You don't need to play the fastest thing on the planet, the most efficient build on the planet that does the most damage. You can play builds for fun. No one says you have to be, you know, the most efficient player known to man. Don't get me wrong, I know it is human nature to be efficient and effective and all those sorts of things, but step back, have a laugh sometimes, play something that sounds a little bit off the wall. One of my friends made a Cyclone Elementalist, and it fucking worked. It worked really well, actually. Like, PoE opens up all those sorts of options, and a lot of people don't really take it. They just seem to play Tornado Shot Ranger every league, but so I don't play Trade League very much. Alright, rant aside, anyways. Skill tree wise, we are of course going Berserker over here, so that means we get Unwavering Stance off of our Rage. We have very good life leech from the node, where is it? I get it from Pain Reaver. We get 2% of attack damage leeched as life. I'm pretty sure that also leeches bleed, don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure, but if it does, we're in a very good spot. As well as Blood Rage gives some leech as well, so we're pretty much covered in that sort of regard. And Pain Reaver also sorts our mana problems pretty much instantly. Pain Reaver is the first node to take while leveling, if you want to take that sort of route. And if you're wondering about leveling path, I went up through Butchery, took these 4 nodes here, then took Res Tech, then went down and around, and came back, and then took those nodes out via the skill point quests. So I went to Res Tech as fast as possible, and then slotted in pretty much everything afterwards. These standards pretty much achieved. I got 150-ish% life, got good life regeneration, flat from Golem's Blood, and having a 5k health pool with percentage regeneration. And we have life regen on the Stone Golem for about 100-ish life regen coming from in here. Plus we've got the Enduring Cry, which adds a rather good amount of life regen. And of course the cast when damage taken Stone Golem. I'll go over all of this very, very shortly. In regards to the rest of the tree, this is how my current character sits. I don't have Aspect of Carnage just yet. I only recently got the final trial, and Blight ends in 4 days. So I'm probably not going to really do much with this character after I finish this video. Probably done with it. But that's optimally where it would be after I pick up Aspect of Carnage. Then I have Crave the Slaughter for Rage, and we have Rite of Ruin for tripled Rage effects. This gives a lot of attack speed that allows you to get pretty okay single target damage. The single target damage is pretty shitty because of the way Bleed works. Essentially, the reason that Bleed DPS is so high over here is I have this box checked. Now, this is how Bleed basically operates. So if the target is standing still, then that's what my Bleed DPS is going to be. If the target is moving, that is what my Bleed DPS is. Which is where the kind of problem comes in with playing a melee Bleed character. Obviously, we're melee, right? So you want to hop in, swing a lot, do damage, and we're good. The problem with PoE's Bleed system is it requires you to make the target move. Which, as a melee character, we don't really care about doing all that often because we want to stay stationary and do as much maximum damage per second as possible. So things kind of get a little bit awkward because you want to make the target move so that they bleed and take more bonus damage from bleeding. Because the way bleed works is it takes, I believe, 80% of the main physical hit and turns that into bleed DPS. Somewhere around there. I don't know if that's the exact math for it. We're going to say so for, you know, representation. Then when they start moving, it turns from 80% to 270%. So it gets modified very, very heavily, right, as I'm sure you can see. So what does that really mean for us? It means that the single target bossing while stood still is pretty shitty. And it means that Bleed heavily favors ranged characters, because think about it, playing a ranged character. You're shooting something, and you're running the opposite direction because you're trying to clear. So then the enemy is wandering towards you because of the way the AI is set up. It wants to move into melee range. So you shoot it, it bleeds, It chases you, it takes 270% bleed damage as it moves, and then it dies very rapidly. So it's more suited to playing as a melee sort of, as a ranged style of character, which is why I've made a bleed ranger as well that I'm working on, and I've had a pretty decent time with in the Ultimate Survival Guide. But other than that, if you do want to play melee bleed, Crimson Dance will allow you to kind of achieve maximum damage in a single target scenario. But you will take a hit in AoE. There's no best of both worlds, sadly. Crimson Dance makes it so you can stack bleed on an enemy up to 8 times. Your bleeding does not deal extra damage while the enemy is moving, 50% less damage with bleeding. Now, all in all, I haven't really used Crimson Dance at all. I'll be entirely honest with you, because my AoE DPS, just as is enough to kill most bosses up to, like, tier 12 so far. Which is more than good enough for me currently, just with the way that I play. Going past that doesn't really make much difference to me. If you want to really push endgame bosses, maybe you go Crimson Dance, you try this sort of scenario out, and let me know what works for you. But all in all, I haven't felt that I really needed it. It does change the way bleed functions, and it makes it so you can stack, obviously the 8 bleeds, so that gives you the maximum damage on single targets without having to make them move and do all that sort of fancy stuff. Is it worth it? I don't really think so, because your single target, or your AoE, does take a massive hit from Crimson Dance, but I have yet to really mess around with it personally. As you can see, like, the bleed DPS would go down to 32k per stack, and then you get 8 stacks of 32k, and that's fucking math I don't feel like doing. Maybe it maths out higher. Thinking about it, it probably does, because 3 times 8 is like 24. Yeah, it's slightly higher, but that's also a pain in the ass to stack 8 bleeds at a time on most enemies. Either way, that's pretty much the skill tree we're looking at. We get the life up here, which is very effective. We get a jewel that is a 1-point jewel. I have damage over time and attack speed with axes in there. Slot in any sort of combination of damage over time, damage with ailments, bleed, anything like that if you are looking for that sort of thing. Moving into skills, we have the pretty standard setup. I have cast when damage taken Stone Golem for a bit of life regeneration. I have a little bit of a cheeky setup with Vengeance life gain on hit, just trying to make myself as tanky as possible, and fill in the extra slots where I can. This is a bit cheeseball. You can put Fortify here if you want to as well. I've made that work as well, but fills the slots for the time being. Got Enduring Cry, have a Dread Banner because I have 100, I believe it's 90 to 100% Impale. I was messing around with that. I can't really tell you if it's that good because you can't really do Impale math just in general in Path of Building, so seems okay. I haven't had any real problems with it, but I don't know. When I get the actual math, I'll get back to you on that one. Vulnerability, Blasphemy, and then Flesh and Stone. Pretty self-explanatory. Vulnerability is very good for bleed stuff because it makes cursed enemies take increased damage over time. Obviously, we were talking about that before. Something else you could get is the damage over time Flask, Witchfire Brew would be very good as well, and then get an extra curse, so you can have Despair and Vulnerability on here as well. You can obviously do a whole lot more in regards to gearing, but of course I'm in solo self-found, so I'll cover everything. I have no fear, but still. Flesh and Stone gives us a bit of extra maim and a little bit of extra damage from that. I'm still figuring out how Flesh and Stone works. It's a little bit weird because, like, Vulnerability has chance to maim, this permanently maims. I don't know, it's a bit of a weird scenario. And in Bladestorm we have Bladestorm, Deadly Ailments, Brutality, Chance to Bleed, Melee Fizz, and Ruthless. Now, the reason Ruthless is in here is because Bleed will only take the highest damage entity, or like the highest damage bleed. Only one can be applied on a target at a time, which is why Ruthless is actually really good. Obviously, it doesn't math correctly in Path of Building, to my knowledge here, but essentially how this goes is you've got your first swing that does damage and then bleeds. Your second swing does damage but doesn't bleed if it doesn't hit higher than the first one. Then you have the third hit, which is the Ruthless, that hits like an absolute freight train that does more melee damage and more damage with bleeding caused by melee hits. So you get to kind of double down on that sort of damage, and that makes your huge bleed that then stays for 8 seconds. So if you really want to optimize your boss kill, you swing 3 times and then you run. It kind of sounds a bit weird, but you hit 3 times, your Ruthless goes off with all your cooldowns, all that sort of shit, and then you just dart to the side and try and make them chase you to get the moving multiplier, and bosses die pretty quickly if you do that sort of thing. Obviously, it is a bit gimmicky, but if you really want to get optimized, you can do something along those lines. Obviously, Brutality, we are not using elemental damage because words are fucking hard. Because with elemental damage, you cannot bleed at all. It's a little weird, but still. Blood Rage gives endurance charges. Leap Slam, Fortify, endurance charge on melee stun. Actually really nice because my Leap Slam kills trash on its own. It's kind of insane, but it works pretty well. Cast when Molten Shell, and then Vol Warchief. Just a bit of extra boss damage. Could probably put Culling Strike in here if I wanted to as well. And then just Blood and Sand. We're on Blood Stance pretty much 24/7. Itemization, pretty simple. I'll go through it in here for you. We have my Project Axe, which is a rather nice piece, but can get a lot better. You could just put it in a disfavor if you wanted to. But where the craziness really comes in isn't really in this weapon, because my weapons are pretty trash normally, but is in the potential weapons that you can make. Because there is a mod that you can get from a Delve fossil, I believe it's the Corroded fossil, that gives you your hits have a 60% chance to deal 60% more damage with bleeding. It's a lot of words, but essentially what it means is when you hit something, there's a chance your bleed deals 60% more. So you stack that with Ruthless when everything goes off correctly, and you've got a thick bleed. So you can just melt bosses, because you have the Ruthless combined with the 60% more from the weapon, right? Combined with the big physical hit in the first place from Ruthless. All the bleed mods stack up, and, you know, you're off to the fucking races with a huge bleed, and you step to the side, they move a ½ inch, and they fall over. So that's what you really want to aim for. Sadly, this character isn't that optimized for farming darkness, because I don't have the world's best life regeneration or darkness res or anything like that. If I wanted to really take this sort of thing to endgame, I'd probably make a second character just to run like darkness stuff and just speed roll axes, like Vol axes, over and over and over again to try and hit the Corroded Fossil mod that I'm missing here. And about the weapon, that's pretty much all she wrote. Big physical weapon with that mod, and you're pretty much in business. Helmet is life res with, I covered the gems already. Amulet is physical damage, life, and stat piece with AoE and increased damage craft from Betrayal. I'll talk about Betrayal in a different video. It's actually not entirely bad when you can choose when you get ass fucked. But, you know, each to their own. Chest piece, I managed a 6-link from Vaults of Zeri in Solo Self-Found, which was pretty impressive. This is not something I do very fucking often, so that was a very good day. Pissed a lot of people off in chat, but still. Got the main setup in there. Have a 2-stone ring with very good resists and some extra life on there. Obviously, all my gear can get better. We're in Solo Self-Found, so, you know, replace it with Trade League gear as you go. Then we have Veno Puncture, which was a very, very good drop. It's basically just permanent chill on anything, which is just great, as well as a bit of extra shatter. I don't know the math for the shatter damage or anything like that, or if the shatter is even worth like caring about, but having permanent chill is a nice layer of survivability, a bit of extra defensive layering, that things will hit you slower and move slower, obviously. So, works out pretty nicely, and you get to hear the crispy shatter sound that goes off when you play like crit builds and all that sort of stuff. It's really good. And it was kind of a pain in the ass because I had to take off my other 2-stone to make it work. So right now I'm sitting on a bit risky resistance, but it works out quite well, and I would recommend slotting it in for the final setup of the build. Boots, I have life, res, movement speed. This can get a whole lot better. Belt, I have life, resists just as much as possible, really. You could put an abyss in here with added fizz on it if you wanted to. Otherwise, what else could you do? Meganords if you really want fizz damage, but just a standard leather belt's what I normally go for. And then gloves is where we get down to brass tacks. These gloves are trash. What you really want to do, and what I don't have access to, is picking up hemophilia. Let's see if I can type this in correctly. Here we go. Hemophilia is hilarious. So you can either take hemophilia and play Berserker, or you can go and play, is it Gladiator? I think it's Gladiator. I don't play Duelist at all. I should eventually, and I will. But Gladiator also has basically the hemophilia effect, which is that bleeding enemies you kill explode, dealing 5% of their maximum life as physical damage. Yeah. That would be absolutely hilarious for this build, combined with when I actually top out my axe and get the more damage for bleed mods, right? Then they just explode everywhere with huge bleeds from Ruthless, and we're just having a great time, and the build fully comes together. But solo self-found restrictions say otherwise, obviously. But all in all, that would be the only piece I'm really missing, aside from a God Roll weapon, and the piece I recommend you get. It's like a 1C unique, so it's pretty cheap. I normally end up making budget builds and budget characters, because according to most people, I value all the wrong items overly highly. That's what happens when you play one archetype over and over. But yeah, that also has increased damage over time and increased bleeding damage, so that's nice for the build in general. And Flask-wise, standard setup, bleed removal, freeze removal. Got a damage Flask to get bleed with Ruthless, makes it go slightly higher. A bit of attack speed there. I prefer curse removal. Got a divination distillate. This was kind of odd, and I make use of it every now and then, but this should be Lion's Roar if you want to really get frisky with it. I'm not that lucky though, not this time. And then I have an adrenaline flask here. This adrenaline should be here. Bleed removal should be here, really. And yeah, that's all she wrote for that. Pantheons are, of course, forgettable. Sometimes I forget they even fucking exist. Lunaris and Life Flasks if you haven't used Flask recently. It's the only really good one. Brine King is not bad if you're having stun issues or if you haven't taken Rite of Ruin yet. And I believe that's everything.